Hey guys, so right before Christmas, I started having anxiety in the night. And this is something that happens to me often. I will sleep for a while and wake up and remember all these things that I have neglected to do. And even though during the day there's something that's not a real big deal, for some reason in that time they just like hit me like a ton of bricks, and there's a ton of suffering and a ton of anxiety that I really feel in my body. And so before Christmas, I remember that I had forgotten to put the trash out, so I had to get up early and make sure that that was done. And it was actually me remembering something that I had actually forgotten to do. So I was having a hard time like seeing through this and letting go of this. And so I really started to try to understand for myself why was I glossing over these things during the day? Did I need to make a list before nighttime of the things I needed to do the next day so I could get them out of my head? Like what was causing, what kind of thought patterns during the day were causing that anxiety at night? And so even during Christmas, I was asking family members, I was like, what's your experience of having anxiety in the middle of the night? I wasn't in a very festive mood, but I was just so curious about this. So I dealt with it a little bit more, and it seemed to be getting more and more, I became more and more aware of it. So sometimes it's hard to tell if something is becoming worse or if we're becoming less willing to suffer in that way. And so I started really questioning it, and there was also a time that I had right after Christmas where I had these all kinds of thoughts and just had this effect where they all popped, and I kind of saw, I was able to connect with my breath a moment, and I was able to see that I was believing these. And when I saw like the mechanism of the belief, it was just so astounding that I couldn't feel that way anymore. And so there really is this pull to awareness, this curiosity to see how the suffering is created. That is kind of the way out. So this leads to this big project that I got drawn into, which leads to how I eventually saw through the anxious thoughts. So I had something happen right before I went to bed where I said something stupid and I started judging myself for it. And I felt a lot of like shame and a lot of like self-judgment. So I went to sleep in that state. And as Abraham Hicks says, you leave your vibration where you left it. So when you fall asleep in a negative state, you'll wake up in a negative state. So I woke up with all this anxiety. Again, I had somehow magically forgotten to put the trash out, and the trash had to be put out first thing in the morning, and that was helpful. But then there were all these kind of like deluded, anxious thoughts that go along with that. So I fell back asleep and I woke up again, and then I had the thought, oh my God, I forgot to buy my kids cheese at the grocery store, which I'm like hating myself for. And then I'm like, wait, I'm going grocery shopping today. I have not had time to forget to buy something at the grocery store. And all of a sudden it just, again, popped. And I saw through what I was doing, and I saw that it was the same feeling that I'd gone to bed with of hating myself, of self-judgment, that was causing this actual like sense of fear, the sense of fear and anxiety. And when I saw that it was the same exact movement, and that those two different feelings didn't have any truth to them whatsoever, I started to understand this in a greater light. And so this leads into the thing I spent an entire day making and put all the ways we suffer. I took the Abraham Hicks emotional chart and also used some of Roger Castillo's teachings about ways we suffer and his term doership, and put it all together with a color wheel. So I'll show you that. So the concept for this whole thing is white light in the center represents source, represents true awareness, represents love, represents our true connection, our true self. And coming out from it is the kind of false duality. All the colors represent different emotions, different ways that we can suffer as we come away from source. So of course, this whole thing looks pretty. It's got all the different colors. But one of the key realizations to this is that every feeling has a flip side and has something that we're avoiding. So every suffering here, every instance of suffering is two sides of the same coin. So for example, you may be so scared of being an unloving person or having other people judge you, saying something that causes them to judge you, showing yourself as a confident person, that you're so scared of being over here that you come over here and you judge yourself before you give anybody else an opportunity to judge you. So in order to avoid this has caused your movement all the way over here. So there, of course, within this white light are various positive emotions. There's gratitude, joy, love, bliss. There's incredibly deep emotions. But this whole thing is illustrated to show our suffering. So the interesting thing to remember about this is as we make the movement, we're scared of being this way. We don't want to identify as being this way. So we come over here and we spend most of our time over here. And you might find that you can sort of like pin where in this wheel you spend most of your time when you're suffering. So two sides of the same coin means these colors are actually very muddled, because whenever we take colors on the opposite side of the color wheel and mix them together, we get brown or we get mud. We get a neutral color that cancels it out. So this is sort of bringing to light, and you might also notice the theme of light and the theme that it very much looks like an eye. And this is perception. This is our thought combined with feeling as a misunderstanding and splitting it into these dualities. So I took the word doership from Roger Castillo. So there are certain beliefs that cause these, and so these lines show the opposite ends of the spectrum of this belief. So the belief that I am the doer, I am responsible for everything that happens in my life, is represented here. So we have the suffering of pride and having to maintain that pride and having to judge others in order to maintain that pride, which kind of goes together as both sides of the same coin of believing that we're in charge and we're the one doing this. And so then again, judgment comes in, belief in self and others causes its extremes, the sufferings of hatred and shame. So we can either judge ourselves or we can judge others, and that is one movement. So this is the key insight to the whole thing. We think that we feel a specific feeling. For example, when I woke up in the night and had anxiety, I didn't connect it with all the self-judgment that I was making. But as I saw that it was the same exact movement, I saw the complete meaninglessness in the emotions that I was feeling. So where thought is interested in moving almost like a compass. The compass can only move. This is your vibration. This is how far away you are from source. So a compass can only move the same distance away from the center. So this is what we're actually becoming aware of and becoming interested in. Whereas before, thought thought it was moving, when in reality it was just moving from all these emotions and feeling regret and feeling blame at the same time, and flip-flopping between them and coming over here. So of course, either one of these, they are related as like two sides of the same coin when they're opposite each other on the wheel, but you can feel, or analogous to each other. Analogous colors are colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. So you can feel like variations of them, and you can see how I put on here how regret is kind of in the middle between guilt and shame, and blame is kind of in the middle between hatred and pride, and overconfidence and believing that our biases are true is kind of like in the middle of these, how they create like the same, just kind of different coloring of the same kind of suffering. So there's also, of course, I put fear and desire, and so I put doubted desire here because a pure desire is the same as love. So nobody actually loves anything, or nobody is actually completely at ease with anything without also there being an element of wanting it. So pure desire is right in the center, but most of the time when we think of desire as suffering, it's a doubted desire. And so expectation, expecting things to go a certain way, that can also feed in with anxiety, is the same kind of movement. And so you also probably know from your experience, when you really think of something that you truly desire, like some of the biggest desires you have, how much thoughts of fear come up. So we experience the two sides of the same coin in a big way when it comes to desire. And so the outside, I completely separated the outside of this wheel for a good reason. And that's because when we get into extreme suffering, it's like the colors muddle together. And the interesting thing about this is it's the same way whether it's extreme or whether it's minor. So it gets hard to separate them out again when they're close to, when they're a real minor form of suffering. So I have malaise, general feeling of dis-ease, apathy, procrastination, impatience. Up kinds of feelings, as they get vaguer, are harder to define and come up with reasons why we feel that way. So that's a dangerous thing when you're close, when you're not feeling that bad. It's a dangerous thing to not be aware of it because you just continue that suffering, and the danger of it is that you get out here somewhere. But it's a blessing in disguise. It's what I call the grace of God when it's severe suffering, because the feelings start to become so intense that it's just purely a feeling, and we no longer, the clarity of thought of us being able to perpetuate it, the illusion that we can actually think and believe that this situation is what's causing us suffering and this situation is going on, that all starts to fall apart. So, like I'm calling the grace of God is the fact that sometimes you can get in such a rage that you act it out, and you actually kind of like fall off this wheel and come back out somewhere here. And generally not in a bliss state, sometimes, generally just in a kind of feeling dead state, or just feeling okay, or kind of like what just happened. But if you look at like Eckhart Tolle's Awakening, for example, severe depression kind of started this questioning, started this thought, I can't live with myself anymore. And all of a sudden that awareness or curiosity or questioning came in. he said, who is the self that I cannot live with anymore? What are there two of me? And that was this sort of realization. And then what happened next was a complete like snap, like the whole thing pops and you come out of it. So it's, like I say, it seems like we have the strongest ones when we can call them a specific thing. And that's kind of the temptation in it, that we really, really believe the stories. But if you can kind of see this, you can see the whole movement and you can understand that this is not true movement and this is the movement that you're interested in, you start to really understand the benefit of using these techniques that bring us back to source and drop thought. So of course, you can just meditate, surely drop thought. You can use thoughts to keep picking a better feeling thought if that works. It's funny how sometimes these things work and sometimes they don't. And as you get better and better at this, it's interesting that the whole thing can kind of fall apart no matter where you are here. If you can kind of like, if you make any direction, any movement in here, like focusing on your breath or whatever, you just give this little bit of space for curiosity to come in and awareness to come in. And the more you look at this stuff, the more that helps too. You can kind of like pop the whole bubble. And the circle shape is super interesting. I used the compass to draw it and I was like, oh, wow. Like when I realized that the distance from source is the real movement there that creates the entire circle. And there's different spiritual teachings that talk about it as one movement, and fear and desire and all of these things. They have like, we can see the multiplicity of beliefs like in doership and the time, projection of time, and creating fear and desire that can cause and perpetuate these. We can see those from this, but at the same time, the main takeaway is to see that it's just simply one movement. And if you can see that and go back, then you can spend more of your time here. So just a couple quick notes. This, like I said, on the edge of it, it's where things are muddled. And an interesting thing is I put grief here with guilt, close to guilt, because I feel like some of the most intense feelings that people experience with grief is complete regret that they didn't spend more time with the person, or they may even have regrets about things that they did in the past. And so a lot of the true suffering of grief is actually over there in the guilt place. But like I said, all of those emotions are so strong and so muddled that they could really be anywhere. So where I place those isn't exactly correct. And I really encourage you to make this yourself in your own experience. And maybe it looks something like this, but just like draw out and kind of see how your suffering is two sides of the same coin. Because essentially, this is how karma, what we mean when we say karma, is created. So you may see that you spend a whole lot of time in one area and that you were actually scared or avoiding something over here. And it's something like this kind of coming back and being loved and understood is what karma is. So I encourage you to draw out something like this for yourself if you feel like doing it, because it can be really helpful just to have this kind of this like image in your mind to kind of like see, oh, look, I'm doing this and this. And of course, this is just a tool. It's a map and it's pretty arbitrary. But when you can sort of like visualize how this whole movement is happening, it can help you to become more aware of it. I have a blog, and I'm going to post this on my blog so you can just have an image of it to refer back to if you want to. And like I say, I encourage you to like write this out yourself and check out the Abraham Hicks emotional scale. So with her emotional scale, you work your way up through emotions, and that is not always true in our experience, that we go through all the emotions that she lists. Again, it's another map and it doesn't really reflect everyone's exact experience. But one of the key takeaways from her emotional scale is that sometimes we actually go through like blame and anger in order to feel better. So we can actually go from severe depression or severe unworthiness, and we can like spin around anywhere, and we can go through blame and anger and go through these different stages of dealing with things. And sometimes as a society and sometimes as individuals, we highly resist people getting angry about things because it can cause them to sort of deal with their problems in a more like extroverted way, which can be lashing out at us, which puts us over in fear. And so that's a really good takeaway. And like emotions, essentially what's going on here with emotions is you are thinking and feeling at the same time. So you're feeling something that feels bad, and you're thinking a thought that's holding it in place and perpetuating it. And so that's the power of dropping thought, and that's the power of awareness, and it all kind of goes to visually show you the power of meditation, love, whatever you want to call it. Another key point I want to make is that the distance away from the center, or from the non-center, from source we are, is the amount of resistance that we're feeling. And if we actually use this to say we should be resisting these feelings themselves, we can kind of turn that in on itself and resist feeling anger or resist feeling any one of these emotions. But when we resist feeling the emotion, we resist feeling awareness, feeling itself, and we avoid source, and we go send ourselves again to the opposite side of the wheel to avoid the feeling that's over there. So that avoidance never actually works. And like there's this brilliant analogy from Rupert Spira that sometimes relaxing a resistance can be a very counterintuitive thing. So if you tense your hand up and clench your hand into a fist and hold it there for a very long time, then when you go to relax it, it feels like you're actually putting in effort. So it's an incredibly subtle thing that you cannot do. Again, note the line of doership. It's something that we actually are.